Dawn comes in layers, a bruise of purple along the horizon, the slow bleed of orange, the city's lights reluctant to die. In the hush before morning, the control room hums like a sleeping animal. Screens glow with maps and shifting dots. Voices are clipped into headsets, and coffee cools untouched. An operator named Ilya leans forward, eyes tracing a thin trail across the display. It is wrong in a way his instincts understand. Before the software does, a presence moving with a stubborn, unnatural certainty, not like the tracery of traffic or the jitter of routine flights. He calls the shift lead. She answers with a single raised eyebrow and a question that's half command, half prayer. Do we have confirmation? The voice on the other end is steady. The kind forged by too many nights where nothing happened, and, once when everything did, they do not yet have the kind of confirmation that justifies alarms and protocols. They have only an uneasy pattern, something moving through the dark with a purpose that smells of calculation. Outside, the town is waking along ordinary lines. A baker flips trays into the oven. Children argue over a lost shoe. A tram clanks toward the market. The machine in the sky keeps moving. Whoever or whatever controls it keeps a single course. It makes no gestures, no evasions, no calls for attention. It is as unemotional as a storm front. Yet it slices across the quiet like a line drawn through glass. In a small village on the edge of the industrial zone, a night shift guard squints at the early light. He feels for a heartbeat the sensation of being watched. He laughs at himself and turns his back to the river. Farther in, the factory sleeps, rows of metal and tarpaulin, racks of machines that have names on paperwork but are nameless at dawn. Pallets lean in the dim, and the drone of refrigeration units keeps a slow, indifferent rhythm. No one sees the shadow that crosses, no camera bothers to tilt. The shadow arrives like fate.
It crosses the border between silence and consequence like a seam being pulled. Airspace that is normally thick with chatter is strangely mute. Sensors flare and blink but never quite tell the whole story. Radio chatter becomes a soft, jittering symphony of assumptions and denials. Technicians offering hypotheses like incense instead of facts. They call in permissions, run checks, open windows of dialogue across distant rooms. And still the thing keeps moving, implacable. When an alert finally clicks into place, it does so like a dropped coin, small, unassuming, then chiming the whole room awake. Protocols thrum into life. Authorities begin to erect a web of cautions and warnings. Teams deploy in whispers like people carrying fragile glass. Panic does not arrive as a single catastrophic wave. Instead, it leaks in through phone calls. A truck driver rerouted, a factory foreman told to stand down, a supervisor told to keep people inside. The machine's route threads past towns and rivers, over flatlands where barns look up like brown teeth. It passes the hulking skeletons of warehouses and the neat geometry of logistics parks, the places that carry the economy's pulse. People in those places are not just blips on a map. They are mothers, fathers, brothers, workers who tell jokes as they replace a bolt, who think in terms of hours and overtime and weekend plans. Each of those plans, for a few tense hours, becomes a contingent probability. A reconnaissance tone echoes through the command room, not details, but a suggestion of limits. Many layers of defense, planned and improvised, try to intercept the narrative. But storylines have a stubbornness of their own. Some things in war are machines and maps. Others are habits and timing. A single decision made in a different minute changes everything. A person takes a cigarette break, a truck arrives early, a guard decides to check a gate he usually ignores. In the control room, tension knits faces into taut canvases. The lead, Katerina, is known for a dry humor that surfaces when danger is manageable. Today, that humor is a memory she keeps to herself. She presses her jaw and moves through checklists by memory, the ritual of it anchoring her. Beside her, Ilya watches with a terrible, precise calm, the kind of calm that belongs to someone who sees the logic of inevitability and refuses to look away. He thinks about how small decisions erect walls or leave doors open.
The impact comes not as a cinematic explosion, but as a cruelty of compression. A sudden, intense heat and a sound like the sky being ripped. Metal folds like paper. Stacks topple and ignite as if approaching a fever. In an instant, decades of planning and production are knocked into an unrecognizable pile. Workers who had arrived early for overnight shifts see their morning rearranged into survival. The factory becomes something else. an orchestra pit where the instruments are now shards and smoke. Emergency services move like ghosts through the ash, faces masked against the hot tang of burned plastic and rubber. Rescue teams shout names that might not exist anymore. People who had clocked in for predictable shifts find themselves carrying colleagues, dragging them through corridors of falling light. A supervisor, a man who once taught his granddaughter to ride a bicycle, stands and cries, not because he is a strong man, but because there are some cries only the world invites. News spiderwebs across phones and screens. Messages multiply, some honest, some frantic, some cruelly precise in rumor. A politician speaks from a sterile podium, syllables chosen to soothe markets and strengthen resolve. In neighborhoods, neighbors open doors to each other, bring out chairs and share cigarettes in the quiet aftershocks. A woman brings a tray of tea to a makeshift shelter and watches with the wary curiosity of someone who would rather fold grief into productive care than let it rot in isolation. For those who engineered the strike, and in this script, their motives can be imagined as vengeance, sabotage, provocation, or desperate defense. The weight of consequence presses differently. Victory tastes of ash when the human ledger comes due. People the world will name as aftermath now exist as charred outlines and missing birthdays. Institutions note damages in numbers. Families count teeth, heirlooms, photographs. The economics of destruction are measured in spreadsheets. The human cost in the lingering blankness on a kitchen table where a child's drawing once lay. In the days that follow, investigations unfurl with a bureaucratic patience that belies the chaos. Teams assemble evidence, shoeboxes of photographs and witness statements that are both precise and heartbreakingly incomplete. Analysts argue about probabilities and intent while families grieve. International observers file terse reports that, read coldly, are little help to a man who lost his sister. Military strategists parse what happened in long memos that will be quoted in conferences and then forgotten by the coffee machine. But the narrative that sticks in alleys and living rooms and late-night radio call-ins is simpler and meaner. This is about the fragility of normalcy. The factory had been one small node in a complicated supply line. Its destruction is a dramatic punctuation mark in a larger, grinding sentence of conflict. People who must live next to the choices of distant leaders learn. In a brutal school, that infrastructure and life are entangled. That economies carry people in their weave. That a collapsed warehouse is not merely freight lost, but livelihoods frayed. There are small acts of humanity, like gluing a ripped photograph back together, like a childcare volunteer handing out coloring books in a gymnasium. There are small acts of anger, too. Graffiti on concrete, a radio show host's bitter monologue, an angry letter to an editor. Politicians try to channel sorrow into policy. Military planners try to turn failure into doctrine. But doctrine can be cruelly optimistic. It promises solutions that sometimes create the very circumstances they aim to prevent. In the public square, online forums and street corners alike, people argue about blame, ethics, and necessity. Some say the strike was an act of righteous sabotage. Others call it a needless atrocity. Somewhere in the argument, the stories of the unnamed workers are muffled into footnotes. A grandmother who once sewed linings for protective vests buys a new kettle with money given by a neighbor and hangs photographs of her family where the smoke won't reach them. A boy who watched the sky that morning draws planes with stern faces on a page, and his teacher puts it on the classroom wall. Life, in stubborn increments, reasserts itself. The ending is not one of closure, but of continuation. Courts, committees, and investigative panels will convene. Some will issue decisive statements, and many will not. The world will admit the event into its ledger, along with other tragedies and triumphs, and move on with the efficiency of institutions. But for the people who lived it, the moment stays, lodged like a splinter in the hand of a neighborhood. It grows callous over time, but it shapes how they look at the sky forever after.